What if the exhaustion you feel is not because you care too much, but because no one ever taught you how to remain open-hearted, without becoming a vessel for everyone else's pain? This is your story, and an ancient way to protect your energy that doesn't require you to build walls around your heart. There is an ancient image that haunts the edges of mythology: the empath who feels too much, the healer who cannot close the wound. In Greek legend, Chiron the centaur carried an injury that would never heal, yet he devoted his life to healing others, bearing his own pain whilst tending to theirs. This is the paradox of the INFJ, particularly the Sigma INFJ, the one who walks between worlds, absorbing the emotional weather of everyone around them, while struggling to protect the very essence of who they are. What if the deepest challenge you face is not learning to care less, but learning to care without disappearing? What if your sensitivity is not a weakness to be managed, but a power that demands a different kind of boundary, one that does not require you to harden your heart, but to understand the architecture of your own soul? The Sigma INFJ does not simply feel deeply, they become a lightning rod for the unspoken, the hidden, the wounds others carry in silence. This is not mere empathy. This is something older, something that Jung recognized when he wrote of those who serve as vessels for the collective unconscious, who absorb what others cannot name. The question is not whether you will feel, the question is whether you will learn to feel without losing yourself in the process. Most advice tells you to build walls, to detach, to care less, but the Sigma INFJ knows that this is a kind of death. The heart that closes to protect itself becomes a tomb. What you need is not a wall, but a different kind of boundary, one that filters without blocking, that protects without numbing. Think of it as the difference between a fortress and a forest. The fortress keeps everything out. The forest allows life to move through, but on its own terms, with its own rhythm, its own seasons of growth and withdrawal. The first sign of the Sigma INFJ, who has not yet learned this art, is the exhaustion that comes not from doing too much, but from feeling too much without discernment. You enter a room and you know instantly who is suffering, who is hiding, who needs something they cannot ask for. This is the gift of dominant introverted intuition, combined with auxiliary extroverted feeling, the ability to read the invisible currents beneath the surface of human interaction. But here is where the Sigma INFJ diverges from the ordinary empath. You do not just feel these things, you absorb them, you carry them, you become responsible for them in ways that were never asked of you, in ways you never consciously agreed to. Carl Jung spoke of the wounded healer, the archetype of one who has suffered, and, through that suffering, gains the capacity to heal others. But he also warned of the danger, the risk, that the healer becomes so identified with the wounds of others, that they lose track of their own story, their own pain, their own need for restoration. The Sigma INFJ often falls into this trap, not out of martyrdom, but out of a kind of unconscious absorption, as if your psyche has no skin, no membrane between your inner world and the emotional fields of those around you. You walk into a conversation with a friend, and you leave feeling their sadness, their anxiety, their unresolved grief, and you do not always realize that these feelings are not yours. This is the first threshold of energy protection for the Sigma INFJ. Not learning to care less, but learning to distinguish between what is yours and what belongs to another. The philosopher Martin Buber wrote of the I-thou relationship, the capacity to encounter another person as a whole being, without collapsing the boundary between self and other. For the Sigma INFJ, this is not a philosophical abstraction, this is survival. When you cannot tell where you end and another begins, you become a ghost in your own life, haunted by emotions that were never meant to be carried by you. The practice here is simple but profound. After every deep conversation, every intense interaction, you must ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? And then, the harder question, is this mine? This is not about dismissing your empathy. This is about honoring it by giving it clarity. You cannot heal what you cannot see. You cannot protect what you do not understand. The Sigma INFJ who learns this begins to feel the difference between resonance and absorption. Resonance is when you feel with someone, when your heart opens in recognition of their pain, but remains anchored in your own center. Absorption is when you take their pain into your body, when you become the container for what they cannot hold. One is connection, the other is a kind of emotional vampirism, though not by intention but by lack of awareness. The second sign is the way you say yes when your body is screaming no. The Sigma INFJ has a peculiar relationship with boundaries. You can see them clearly in others. You can advocate for them fiercely on behalf of those you love. But when it comes to your own needs, your own limits, you become strangely blind, as if your own well-being is somehow less important than the comfort of others. This is not selflessness. This is self-abandonment. There is a myth that may speak to this. In Norse legend, the goddess Freyja possessed a cloak of falcon feathers that allowed her to travel between worlds, to see from great heights, and to move swiftly and with keen vision. But the cloak could also be borrowed, and Freyja, in her generosity, would lend it to those who needed it. The question the myth does not answer is this: what happens when the cloak is never returned? What happens when Freya is left without the very thing that allows her to move freely, to see clearly, to reclaim her own power? The Sigma INFJ lends their energy, their time, their emotional labor, often without realizing that they have not negotiated the terms of return. You give because it feels natural, because your heart moves toward those in need, because somewhere deep in your psyche, you have learned that your value is tied to how much you can give. But this is a lie, a beautiful lie perhaps, one wrapped in the language of compassion and service, but a lie nonetheless. Your depletion does not measure your value. The practice of saying no without guilt is not a rejection of your compassionate nature. It is an affirmation of it. When you say yes to everything, you say yes to nothing fully. Your presence becomes diluted, your energy scattered, your heart spread so thin that there is nothing left for the work that only you can do, the relationships that truly matter, the inner life that feeds everything else. Nietzsche wrote that one must have chaos within to give birth to a dancing star, but chaos without a container is simply destruction. The Sigma INFJ must learn to be the container, to hold the chaos of their own depths, without spilling over into every request, every demand, every expectation placed upon them by a world that will take as much as you are willing to give, and then ask for more. This is where the archetype of the hermit becomes essential, not the hermit who retreats out of fear, but the hermit who withdraws to listen, to restore, to remember who they are, when no one is asking anything of them. The Sigma INFJ needs regular non-negotiable time alone, not as a luxury but as a necessity. This is not antisocial, this is self-preserving. In solitude you are not absorbing, you are metabolizing. You are allowing your system to process what you have taken in, to release what is not yours, to return to your own frequency. Think of it as tuning an instrument. If you play constantly without ever pausing to retune, the music becomes discordant, and the notes lose their clarity. Your energy is the same. Without regular recalibration, you lose the ability to hear your own signal beneath the noise of everyone else's needs. The third sign is the belief that protecting your energy means closing your heart, that the only way to stop absorbing pain is to stop feeling altogether. This is the great tragedy of the Sigma INFJ, who has been hurt too many times, who has given too much and received too little in return. They begin to equate boundaries with coldness, protection with disconnection. They swing from one extreme to the other, from absorbing everything to feeling nothing, and neither state honors the truth of who they are. There is a teaching in Tibetan Buddhism about the Bodhisattva, the enlightened being who vows to remain in the world of suffering to help others awaken. But the Bodhisattva does not suffer in the same way as those they serve. They have learned to hold compassion without attachment, to feel deeply without being swept away. This is the art the Sigma INFJ must learn. Not detachment, but non-attachment. Not coldness, but clarity. The difference is subtle but essential. Detachment says, "I will not feel because feeling is dangerous." Non-attachment says, "I will feel fully, but I will not cling to the feeling. I will not make it my identity. I will not let it define my worth, or dictate my actions." The Sigma INFJ who masters this becomes something rare and powerful. They remain open-hearted, but they are no longer porous. They still feel the pain of others, but they do not take it on as their own. They offer presence without taking on responsibility for outcomes they cannot control. This requires a kind of spiritual maturity that most people never develop, because it is easier to close down than to stay open with discernment. Jung wrote of individuation, the process by which a person becomes who they truly are, distinct from the collective, no longer driven by unconscious forces but by conscious choice. For the Sigma INFJ, individuation includes the realization that your empathy is a gift, but not a mandate to fix, rescue, or carry what others must carry themselves. You can hold space for another's pain without making it your project. You can witness suffering without becoming its solution. This is not cruelty. This is respect. It is the recognition that every person has their own journey, their own lessons, their own capacity to heal, and that sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is to trust them with their own process. The practice here is to notice when you slip into the role of savior, when you begin to believe that you are responsible for another person's emotional state, when you start to feel guilty for not doing enough, not being enough, not giving enough. These are signs that you have crossed from compassion into codependency, from love into loss of self. The Sigma INFJ who protects their energy without losing their heart learns to say, "I see your pain, I honor your struggle, and I trust you to find your way through it. I will walk beside you, but I will not carry you." This is not abandonment. This is empowerment for both you and them. In the end, protecting your energy is not about loving less. It is about loving more wisely, more sustainably, more truthfully. It is about recognizing that you are not infinite, that your capacity has limits, and that honoring those limits is not selfishness, but sacred responsibility. The wound will always be there. The world will always need healing. But you cannot pour from an empty vessel, and you cannot light the way for others if you have extinguished your own flame in the process of trying to save them from the dark. If this resonated with the part of you that has walked alone, that has carried too much, that has wondered whether your sensitivity is a curse or a gift, then subscribe so we don't lose touch on this journey of understanding who you truly are. Comment below and let me know. Did this mirror something you felt but never named? You're not alone in this. There are others like you, walking the same path between worlds, learning to honor both their depth and their boundaries.